Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. The network is AFR Talk. Going to play you a couple of sound bites from Benjamin Carson from a talk he gave at a church conference a number of years ago on the issue of creation and evolution. We talked off and on about evidences for a young earth. It's clear, I believe, if you read the scriptures and take them at face value, which I do, you make it your goal to understand the scriptures according to the authorial intent, which is the only way you can interpret any piece of literature. Either a piece of literature means what its authors intended it to mean, or it can mean anything you can dream up. In other words, the only restraint on how you understand a piece of literature is what the author of that piece of literature meant. What did he intend by the use of the words that he picked? And if that doesn't guide you, if that doesn't control you, then a book or a piece of literature can mean anything that anybody's fevered brain can dream up. And if you read the scriptures according to authorial intent, what was the intent of the author? It's very clear that the earth is not billions and billions and billions and billions of years old. It, in fact, is probably in the neighborhood of just thousands of years old. Now, if that's true, then we ought to see some evidence of a young earth in nature, and we do. And we've gone over some of the evidences for a young earth. Here's another one. Again, this comes from Answers in Genesis, and it has to do with the amount of salt in the sea, believe it or not. Here's what the article says. If the earth was just 3 billion years old, we can measure the rate at which salt is being dumped into the sea. If the oceans were only 3 billion years old, and yet evolutionists insist that the earth is somewhere between 15 and 30 billion years old, or 3 billion. I mean, some may say it's only 3 billion years old and the universe is 15 to 30 billion, whatever. But let's say 3 billion years, very conservative estimate. Let's say an evolutionist believes the earth has been and the seas have been around for 3 billion years. At the rate in which salt is being deposited into the oceans, there would be 70 times more salt in the ocean than we see today. And here's what the article says. Every year, rivers, glaciers, underground seepage, and atmospheric and volcanic dust dump large amounts of salts into the oceans. Some 458 million tons of sodium mixes into ocean water each year, but only 122 million tons, about 27% of what's deposited, is removed by other natural processes. So what is that? You got a net 336 million tons of sodium dumped into the oceans of the sea every year. Here's what the article goes on to say. If seawater originally contained no sodium, no salt, and the sodium accumulated at today's rates, and remember, this is what evolutionists say, everything's been going on in this same slow process for billions and billions and billions of years. If seawater accumulated at today's rate, or salt accumulated at today's rates, then today's ocean saltiness would be reached in only 42 million years, only about 1/70th the 3 billion years that evolutionists proposed. Now, you've got a catastrophic flood where you're obviously going to have that process of depositing sodium into the ocean accelerated for that period of time, for some brief period of time, very, very intense level of deposition taking place. That would explain why you can get there in a relatively brief amount of time, and perhaps God created the oceans with salt in them. But at any rate, the plain fact is you'd have 70 times more sodium in the ocean if the oceans were as old as evolutionists insist they are. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, it makes perfectly good sense theologically. It makes perfectly good sense from a literary standpoint, and it makes perfectly good sense from a scientific standpoint to believe the scriptural account of origins. Now, here is clip number 1. This is Benjamin Carson. Remember, this guy is a pediatric neurosurgeon. He operates on brains day in and day out, one of the most advanced brain surgeons in the entire world. He probably knows more about how the brain operates and the nervous system operates than just virtually any man alive. And he says how that bears on the question of origins. Let's listen.
people here remember your birthday? Okay, I think it's unanimous. Now what about the Big Bang Theory? I find the Big Bang really quite fascinating. I mean, here you have all these highfalutin scientists, and they're saying that there was this gigantic explosion and everything came into perfect order. Now these are the same scientists who go around touting the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy, which says that things move toward a state of disorganization. So now you're going to have this big explosion and everything becomes perfectly organized. And when you ask them about it, they say, well, we can explain this based on probability theory. Because if there's enough big explosions over a long enough period of time, over billions and billions of years, one of them will be the perfect explosion. And I say, so what you're telling me is if I blow a hurricane through a junkyard enough times, over billions and billions of years, eventually after one of those hurricanes, there'll be a 747 fully loaded and ready to fly. Well.
You know, and people, intelligent design movement and the creation science movement, we've often made this argument that the chances of all of this happening by chance, impossible. It's just impossible. The number it vanishes to zero, infinitesimal. The chances indescribably, almost impossible to compute. The chances are so tiny that life could have arisen by chance. And one of the famous critics of intelligent design said, look, the chance of all of this happening, the odds of something happening that we see around us, the origin of everything, the origin of life, all of its order, all of its complexity, the chance of all of this, the odds of something like this happening by chance. And this guy was not a Christian. He was a Hindu mathematician, wasn't even a believer in Christ. He was just a scientist who he knew something about math, and he knew a lot about math, and he knew a lot about science. He said, look, you calculate the odds here, and there's no way. There's just no chance. He didn't even believe in the Bible, doesn't even believe the creation account. He just says, listen, this didn't happen by chance. There's no possible way. In fact, the analogy he used is to think that this all could happen by chance is to believe. It's just the same as if believing that you could have a tornado sweep through a junkyard, all of this junk, jumbled pieces and parts scattered all over the place. This tornado could sweep through that junkyard, and when the tornado moves off into the distance, it would leave behind a fully assembled, operational 747. Now, it's preposterous, but this is an Indian mathematician saying those are the odds that something like this could happen by chance. Number to call if you want to join the program is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. And Jeff, do we have that other soundbite? Okay, now this is the one I think where he talks about what has to happen. Remember, he asked that question, part of the first soundbite. He asked that question, how many of you remember your birthday? Everybody's hand went up almost instantly. And he explains how that process works.
How many people here remember your birthday? Okay, I think it's unanimous. What did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Well, first of all, the sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory medius, travel down to your tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory force, which travel across the ossicles of the middle ear to the over and round little segment of vibratory force in the inner lip, which mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, which traveled across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontonic junction, from there to the superior olivary nucleus, sitting bilaterally at the brainstem to the laminiskis to the inferior colliculus, and the medial geniculate nuclei across the thalamic radiations to the posterior temporal lobes begin auditory process. From there to the frontal lobes, coming down the tract of Victor's jury, retrieving the memory from the medial hippocampus, structuring the memory bodies back to the frontal lobes to start the motor response at the bed cell level. Coming down the cortical spinal tract, across the internal capsule into the cerebral peduncle, descending down to the cervical medullary decusation, into the spinal cord gray matter, synapsing there, going out to the neuromuscular junction, stimulating the nerve and the muscle. So you can raise your hand. And that's the simplified version of what your brain has to do. See if you can get one of those rap singers to do that. But if your brain can do that and you barely even had to think about it. What is your brain capable of if you actually put your mind to something? And someone wants to tell me that that came from a slime pit with a bunch of promiscuous biochemicals? Give me a break. You know, that really stretches the limits of credulity.
So that's Dr. Benjamin Carson just talking about what has to happen, all of the complex processes that have to occur before you can even virtually spontaneously raise your hand in response to a simple question. He says the chances that something that complex could happen entirely by accident, by the random collision of atoms, by promiscuous chemicals in some kind of primordial swamp, he says it's impossible. It's ludicrous. In fact, the people that are acting irrationally here have set logic and rationality and reason and their brains and their mental processes on hold are the people that insist in still believing in evolution. They're the ones that are out of touch with reality. They're out of touch with scientific fact. They're out of touch, as Dr. Carson illustrates, with neurological fact. They're out of touch with biological fact. As we saw at the beginning of this segment, they're out of touch with geological fact, and in addition to being out of touch with theological fact. So, ladies and gentlemen, look, don't ever, ever, ever apologize to anybody for believing the biblical account of origins. Don't ever, ever back down, retreat, back away from, apologize for believing in a young earth. It's the most rational, defensible, scientifically supportable theory of origins that exists. So don't apologize for it. Defend it. Don't worry if you can't answer all of the questions that come up. Get yourself the book Scientific Creationism by Dr. Henry Morris, or pick up a good book on intelligent design, and it won't be long before you'll have answers to those questions. But do not doubt the Word of God. Dr. Benjamin Carson doesn't, and neither should you. Focal Point AFR Talk. We'll be right back with your phone calls and more. Stay with us. Focal Point AFR Talk.